Hi, this is Chuck Wolf, and this is the WPKN 89.5 FM, listener-supported radio. It's the Emotion Roadmap. Take the take the wheel and control how you feel. I'm just getting situated here to get started for the day. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. I want to thank you for listening to the show. But glad to be back with you in February. This is Black History Month, and it's a special month. A lot of programming. If you get a chance to look at the website, you can see that we've got a lot going on here. If you want to call in and talk with me about anything going on in your life, 203-336-9756, and that should work for you. So I'm hoping that we get a chance to talk with you today. And if you want to give me a call and talk about something going on in your life that has some emotional association with whatever it is you're facing, some challenges, some uncertainties, some doubts, some concerns, please give me a call. In the meantime, I would like to talk a little bit about so at least my take on some of what's happening with Black History Month. I don't know if I know some of you that might be listening are football fans. Many of you probably are not, but nevertheless, this has to do with Black History Month and has to do with football. We're in the middle of heading towards the Super Bowl, and there's a lot of really great football that's been played. Anybody that's been watching knows that. So one of the things that I'd like to just acknowledge is that there's just been a class action lawsuit filed by a Black football coach who had been let go by the Miami Dolphins, a person named Brian Flores. And apparently, according to Brian, there's a lot of discrimination in football against head coaches or top administrative positions in football. Certainly, there are a lot of Black players, extremely talented athletes playing the game, but there aren't so many people in the front office positions. And Brian Flores has decided to call this out. Now, whether he's right or wrong, I'm not going to speculate on that, but it is consequential, and he's got some interesting facts, and I suggest you look it up and find out what he's claiming and what he's kind of responding to from his own personal experience. Brian used to be the defensive coordinator for the New England Patriots, so many of you know I'm a Patriots fan, and so I followed his career somewhat, and I followed him over when he went to Miami Dolphins, where he's coached for the last several years, and actually did really well, but still was let go. So he's got quite a story to tell, and you may have some thoughts about that. If you want to comment about that, I'm happy to entertain that. If you want to call in and just chat about your thoughts about that, and I'll share mine at some point if you like. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that one of my friends, Lindsay Wallace, who I had on the air a couple of years ago in another Black History Month, had passed away this past year. He was 94 years old, and he was a gentleman, and he was one of the people I met on the planet that I consider one of the best human beings I've ever had the privilege of getting to know and be friends with. And Lindsay was one of those people that was a Black man who grew up, again, 94 years old. So he grew up with a lot of challenges in his life that I think are not the same, of course, as what people experience today around racism. But nevertheless, Lindsay was someone who had that really amazing ability to turn lemons into lemonade, I guess. He just was someone who always took a positive spin on life. And he just really felt that there were some things going on that he felt he could influence, and he made some changes, and he accomplished some amazing things. So one of the things that he did is he really found some ways to engage in getting people to be less conscious of race and more conscious of character. And that was consistent with what I grew up with I grew up in the 60s and protesting in favor of civil rights, and Martin Luther King was a hero of mine and so many other people when I was growing up. And he talked about, judge each of us by our character, not our color. And that was something that Lindsay really took to heart. And yet, interestingly enough, that's not the way a lot of people feel today, that people want you to notice their color. And again, as a white person, I obviously am only an observer of this, but I had the wonderful opportunity to work with a professor at Wharton University recently, who is, she teaches diversity, inclusion, and equity. And she was explaining to myself and others that, it's different. It really is different. At one time we really focused on the idea of being colorblind.
And now we want people to understand that color matters. Color matters because there's a tremendous amount of racism you can't possibly understand unless you are in our skin and you have the experiences that we've grown up with. And of course, they're different across the board. Everybody's experiences aren't the same. But, it was really an interesting conversation. So I know that there's a lot of views about how things are changing. I know there's a tremendous polarization in the country and people feeling like there's systemic racism everywhere, and it's talked about often. And other people feeling like, yeah, but life is so much better. And this isn't just, it isn't just one group of people saying to another group of people. It's like across the board in all groups of people that people have different opinions, it seems. And so it's curious. I think one of the things that I feel that the emotion roadmap contributes to this kind of conversation is that no matter who you're talking to, you always want to be thoughtful about how you might make them feel with what you say, about anything consequential and anything that might be conceived as controversial. But if we can be more concerned with other people's feelings. The emotion roadmap is this idea of we can control how we feel. We have not always, by the way, but we can often control how we feel. And we can also influence how other people feel, right? We can influence how other people feel. We can't control other people's feelings, but we can influence them. For instance, when I have a caller, and those of you that might be new to the show, when you call into the show, the idea of take the wheel and control how you feel as a tagline for the show is to help you to understand that when you're stuck, when a smart person calls into the show, and I only have smart people listening, but when you call into the show and you're stuck, it's often because something emotional is happening inside you. Emotion is something you're experiencing, like self-doubt or confusion or worry. And why might those things be something you're experiencing? Well, you might be worried about escalating a situation you know you have to talk to somebody about who's dear to you, or maybe you don't even like them. They may not be dear to you, but they're somebody that you work with, so they're important to be able to influence. And yet the conversation you have, you want to have or need to have, is something that has some possibility of escalation because maybe you're not happy with something they're doing and you'd like to see some change happen. I mean, that's not unusual, right? That's all distinctly possible. So having said that, what do you think needs to happen? Well, I think the best way to think about that, and when people call in, is you want to think about, hey, I know how I'm feeling, and I can anticipate somewhat accurately what this other person that I need to talk to is feeling. Okay? So one is, how am I feeling, and how is this other person that's key to the conversation feeling? And how are they likely to feel if I say things a certain way? What's going to happen if I say it this way? What's going to happen if I say it that way? How do I want them to feel about the conversation? Well, I want them to feel supported. I want them to feel collaborative. I want them to feel engaged. I want them to feel interested. Pardon me. I want them to feel willing to change, if that's what's required. But how do I do that in a constructive, collaborative fashion? And, when you sit down and you stop and you do what I call emotional planning, you actually come up with some pretty neat stuff. And that's what I try to help people do on the show. So whether we're talking about anything to do with people being of a different color, a different ethnicity, a different religion, whatever it might be, partly we want to anticipate and understand their experiences. And that's not always very easy to do, is it? Because if we don't live in their shoes, it's hard to stand in their shoes and experience what they experience. Understood? So if you think about it that way, then one of the things that occurs is that you try to be a little more thoughtful and methodical about the way you approach your conversations with folks. So for me, it's really important to understand that different people have different experiences at different times. So one person's version of what they see is systemic racism, like Brian Flores in the National Football League. Somebody else might just see is, hey, this person wasn't the best candidate, and so they didn't get it, not because of their color, but because we thought somebody else was better. But I was listening to Michael Hawley, a black sports analyst, a great journalist and analyst on NBC Sports Boston last night. And what Michael said was, you know, one of the things that happened, I'll just tell you a little bit about the Brian Flores situation, is that it got out that it seemed the New York Giants had already decided on who they wanted to be their coach, a fellow named Brian Daboll, white guy from Buffalo. And they had decided that before it was announced, before even Brian Flores, who was a candidate for the position, had even been interviewed. So that's pretty upsetting from Brian Flores' perspective, you might agree. But what happened, it seems, is the coach of the New England Patriots, Bill Belichick, I guess apparently has Brian Daboll, who was the offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills, in his phone contacts. He also has Brian Flores, who used to work for him, in his phone contacts. And he apparently sent a text to Brian Daboll, he thought, saying, "You got the job, Brian. Congratulations. I guess it's yours if you want it." And Brian Flores is who got that text. And Brian Flores hadn't even interviewed for the job yet. He was scheduled to go up there the next day to visit with the Giants. And Flores wrote back, "Coach, thanks. That's great. I didn't hear anything. How do you know?" And the text went back and forth. And then Bill Belichick, the New England coach, the text that I saw, I don't have firsthand evidence of this, but the text that was reported on TV said that I effed up. You know, he was writing to the wrong Brian. And so Brian Flores thinks, well, that's a racist issue. And this is why. And this is what Michael Hawley was saying. Michael Hawley said the New York Giants, to cover themselves, said we picked the coach we thought had the best qualifications for the job. Sounds okay, except what Michael Hawley said is African Americans find that exacerbating because what they said was we picked the best qualified. Brian Daboll has never been a head coach. He's been an offensive coordinator for Buffalo, a very successful one, by the way. And I'm not saying he won't be a great coach for the Giants. I have no idea. But Brian Flores has actually been a head coach for 3 years and worked to have 2 winning seasons and was considered really effective at bringing and putting a team together. And so to say that he was less qualified than Brian Daboll, you can understand why he felt this was extremely unfair. So one person might see that as systemic racism. Another might just see it as, hey, they decided they wanted to go with this guy because they were picking the head of player personnel, general manager for them was also coming from Buffalo. And it made sense to take the two together because they already had worked together. No problem with that. But the way it all played out, it certainly can be seen by many as systemic racism. So again, how we view these things is colored, if you will, use the metaphor of colored by our own personal experiences. And if we've been the target of systemic racism in our lives, which I haven't, but others have, you tend to see that as a possibility, a distinct possibility, and the most probable reason why this might happen. Now, I'm not saying it was or isn't, racist, what happened, but you can certainly see an argument for that. So, I mean, I think that's really interesting that it happens right at the beginning of Black History Month. And so, as I said, and the person that I met from Wharton, that was such a lovely woman who talked with us, got kind of controversial because a lot of us that are older and, baby boomers, if you will, grew up with the idea that we don't want to see color. We heard Martin Luther King say, don't judge us by our color, judge us by our character. Judge everyone by their character. And that's not the case anymore. So that's changed. For some, not for everybody. For some, not for everybody. So it's sort of hard to know sometimes how to respond correctly, but you just want to do the best you can with the intent of trying to be attentive to how your conversation and your decisions impact others in terms of how people are going to feel. So anyway, that's my comment about Black History Month and some of the things happening in the world to people of color. And I just one other comment I'm going to make is that, pardon me, I'm sorry, I have a cough. One of the things that I just want to also comment on is the nomination for the new Supreme Court Justice. Now, I hope President Biden finds a wonderful Black woman to be the Supreme Court Justice to replace Justice Breyer. And I hope that's true. But when he said that's the only group of people he's going to look at, maybe they felt great about that. I'm guessing they may not have, and I'll say why in a minute. But at the same time, when you say it's only this group of people and not others, you're telling, I'm not going to look at any Native American judge. I'm not going to look at any Hispanic American judge, Asian American judge, white American judge, or any Black men judges. So you're telling all these other people that you're not really a candidate for this opportunity because I want to do the right thing and pick a Black woman judge. And so some people might say, that's wonderful, President Biden. And other people say, that seems unfair. What I really would have liked to have happened is that he didn't say that at all. He just did it. He just did it. He just found, out of all the qualified, wonderful people out there who are Black women judges who qualify to be a Supreme Court justice, he just picked that person to be a nominee. And just did it and didn't make the statements that I'm excluding all these other groups. I don't know that he did himself any favors that way. I know there's so much that divides us, but one of the things I learned years ago from a friend of mine, when I was at Harvard, late 1970s, I was friendly with a fellow named Carlton Holland, a Black gay man at Harvard who was in my class with me. And Carlton told me, he said, Chuck, one of the things that happens to someone like myself who's very successful and does very well is we always have to fight against the idea that we're here because of affirmative action, because we're here because we got the opportunity because of the color of our skin. And because people then don't really believe we're going to be able to contribute at the level that we should, we have to work doubly hard to prove that we were the best pick. Doubly hard. And that's been true all my life and my friends' lives. And I thought, again, something I never experienced because I wasn't Black and didn't have that experience. And I listened to him and I thought about that and I never forgot it. So I think when you announce you're going to pick somebody from a certain group, that's so unfair to the people in that group. Now people wonder, did they just get picked because of that as opposed to because of their brilliance and their competence? So I just think it would have been so much better if he just did it without, again, saying these things. So I'm always thinking about how are other people feeling? How are they likely to feel about really consequential things I'm going to say or do? Even bringing up these topics, I know they're controversial, so I might raise a few people's eyebrows to hear the conversation today. But I just think if we're going to really look at Black History Month and in terms of how do we help all of us move forward collectively in the best possible versions of each of us, being supportive of one another, bringing our country and all of our people together, despite different political views, despite different religious concerns, despite different beliefs, values, and so forth, but that we all want to be the best versions of ourselves, and we want to all help each other be the best versions of themselves. That's sort of the goal of the show. So the show is the emotion roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. So if you'd like to call in and you're a regular listener and you've been waiting to talk to me about something on your mind that you'd like some help with, the show is about helping you think through your current situation, your existing situation, what's going on for you, what are you concerned about, where do you seem to be stuck, and then asking you these questions. How are you feeling? Who else is key to what's happening, and how is he, she, or they feeling? What would be ideal for you to feel about this? What would be ideal for any of these other key people to feel? How do you get from what you are feeling to what is ideal to feel. How do you do it? And then we look at, and I help you with, trying to understand strategies to help you get from, if you need to be confident and you're feeling anxious, how do you do it? And I ask you to start exploring ways with me about how you might get to feel less anxious, more confident in your current circumstance, if that's the challenge you're facing. And if you're dealing with somebody else and you want them to feel more supportive and less negative, how do we get them to feel more supportive? What strategies might actually influence? What might we say or do to influence that? And often what I find is people at the end of my conversation with you about whatever it is that's you might be struggling with at the moment, you feel like you got a plan. And, having a plan feels great, number one. And number two, anytime you have any challenging situation that you're facing and you want to go in and deal with, and you feel like you want to do something really important, you really want to get something done, and you want to do it in a collaborative way as opposed to just push on through. How do you plan emotionally for that? If you take a few minutes and you think about the emotions that are likely in play, that you're experiencing, that others who are key might be experiencing, and what would be ideal for you and the others to feel instead of what's current. What would be the future best feelings for the circumstance that you face at a particular point in time? And you start to plan for that. How can you not be better than just going in and winging it? Right? I mean, if you take a little bit of time and you think about, how am I feeling? How do I want to feel? How do I want them to feel? How are they feeling? What can I do to create the feelings I want for me and for them? And I help you with that. You're going to feel like you got a plan. Now, having a plan doesn't mean it's going to work, but having a plan means that you feel some hope and some positive vibes around the idea of having this conversation where before you might have been terrified about it or just really concerned. So if you want to call in, the number is 203-336-2756. 203-336-2756. You're welcome to talk about any of the topics we chatted about today or anything else. Okay. All right. So anyway, I'll give you a minute to call. 203-336-9756. Okay. So either I didn't raise, it didn't seem, there's no one calling at this time. So I have another topic I'm going to talk about that's different. But we've got a caller, so fine.
Hello.
Hi, this is Chuck. You're on the air. Who am I talking to, please?
Yeah, hi. This is Norman. I called you before on other subjects.
Hi, Norman. Thanks for the call.
Yeah, you're welcome. You talk about feelings of anxiousness and what can you do about them. Well, there's one thing that I do for myself, and there's what they call the Course in Miracles. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
No, I haven't.
It's Marianne Williamson.
Is she the one that ran for president?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's a very spiritual, looks at life in many ways, and she's got a book out, and she has daily insights on how to look at things going on in your life. And it's, unusual. It's very spiritual, like I said, mentions, the God within us and how reality is and how we understand reality and, and the things that go on around us. In particular, we have Black History Month this month. And this is something that's really dwells in my mind. And it's, what do we do about this relation with racial business? Okay. it's such an ingrown thing. It's like a thorn in the side with people. All right, and I grew up in Brooklyn, and when I was a kid, there was a lot of black hatred in my neighborhood, and it was all around us. It was like you couldn't avoid it.
Yeah.
And so up in these days, in this day, I still see it going on, and I myself battle with this feeling of how I was and how it is now, and trying to get rid of this racial baloney that's going on in this world, in the country. And the people just don't let it go. They just don't see that black is black and white is white, and we're all the same people, all kinds of, all made up of the same,
right?
Makeup.
Yeah.
So what do you do about this? It's because, like I said, it's such an ingrown thing. So what do you do?
Well, it's curious, Norman. I just want to say that I think that people are trying. I mean, there's some attempts to teach about race in schools. Some of it has not worked out as well as maybe people had hoped who tried that. But I do think that, we try to be, as open and understanding to everyone as you can, and you want to be the best possible version of you. And so, I mean, all of us, just to be clear, in my mind anyway, we all have biases, everybody. And it's partly because it's not just about color, obviously, it's about all kinds of things. But, we can't be in somebody else's skin. So I think the fact that, if you're a black person driving in a white town and you get pulled over by the police just because you're a black person, and there's no other reason. I mean, if you're a white person, you've never had that experience. So you can't really understand that in terms of identifying empathically with what that feels like. But you can intellectually understand how that must feel. And so I think you just want to, wherever you can, wherever you notice your own biases, is to confront them and to understand where they come from. Just like you said, Norman, where you grew up. We all grew up, and partly, I don't know about you, but so many of us grow up and we define ourselves by the neighborhood we're in. So even within your own town, even you live on this side of the street, you live on that side of the street, or you live in this part of town. Yeah, I mean, we all have these definitions of like who we belong to somehow. And it's not the same. Yeah. And it's not the same for all white people, all black. It isn't the same for everybody. But we do have prejudices that we just kind of grow up with. You almost can't help that. But what you can help is how you respond to when you start to feel that bubble up inside. I mean, the whole idea of the roadmap is that when you recognize common themes coming up in your mind, then you want to just go down a different pathway than the ones that take you to a place that's a dark place and it doesn't end well. So if you've got these kind of history of racism somehow in your head, not just racism against blacks, but against anyone, you just want to just say, wait a minute, that's just stuff that was somebody filled my head with. It's not real. And I got to let go of that somehow and just try to educate yourself and try to be more open to people and supportive.
It's other people's reality. That's what it comes down to. I mean, I'm trying to change my reality about this whole thing.
Right.
Now, for instance, like I said, I came from Brooklyn, New York, and I moved into a nice, influential town here in Connecticut. And I was driving around in a 1985 Chevy Caprice for a long time, and it didn't fit in with this town because everybody was driving around with SUVs and Lexus and BMW.
You didn't fit. You were a different crowd. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And I was, I got stopped by the police once for doing nothing.
Just because of the car you were driving,
just because of the car. Yeah. And they got me out of the car and they searched me. They thought I was a drug dealer or something.
Yeah.
So here I am, a white guy in this white influential town.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous. So there's a prejudice right there. It goes along with racial,
Well,
race.
I think one of the things that I noticed, and this is interesting too. So the woman that I met from Wharton University was speaking to a group of us in a conference on people who are researchers on emotional intelligence, really top people in the world on this topic. And she came in and she was talking to us about this. And so one of the people in the room, after she spoke for a few minutes, raised her hand and said, "You know what? As a white woman in Montreal in the university system, I've experienced racism. I've experienced sexism, and I can identify with what you're speaking about." And the woman who was the guest speaker said, "You know what? That's not the same. That's not the same. I mean, I accept that you had some experience, but that's different than living in my skin color in this country." And so while we might think that what we're feeling is somehow similar, I don't think it is.
Yeah.
I think it's related, but I think we have to understand that people are, feeling really different. Again, that whole thing about Martin Luther King, judge me by my character, is like it isn't good enough by itself anymore. You just have to recognize that I am a person of color, and that has a meaning in this country, and I want you to understand that meaning. So
exactly. I mean, that's what the latest thing with Whoopi Goldberg, or what she said just the other night on the TV, or the other morning on her TV show about the Holocaust and the Jews, and she was saying that wasn't a racist thing. That was they were white people and killing white people, and it was an ethnic type of thing. But people were outraged. Oh no, that was racial. That was Rachel, and then racial. She had to come back on TV and sort of apologize and correct herself, and saying, "Oh yes, well the Nazis did say, yep, they're an inferior race."
Yeah, that's
the
true.
Jews,
Yeah. This is again very controversial stuff, right?
Yeah, so that was a very interesting thing.
Yeah,
and I felt sorry for Whoopi.
Huh.
She had to go out and do a public apology, but just it's so touchy. It's such a touchy subject.
Yeah, it's hard to be right in this world right now around these topics. But I think that, again, you can do the best you can to try to have a conversation about it, not be afraid to talk about it, not be afraid to challenge your own beliefs, because that's something I had to do listening to this, because it's changed. And from when I was growing up, and I don't think of myself as racist at all, but I know I have biases that I was drilled into my head when I was a kid that are still in there someplace. Not just about blacks, but about anybody that's different than me in some ways.
Right.
So it's like you just got to do the best you can to be the best you can be. You're right. You understand? I mean,
right.
You don't want to be harshly critical of yourself because you have these beliefs, because I think we all have them. But you also don't want to ignore the fact that we have them, and that you want to be better than that.
Well, no, you don't want to ignore it. No. And sometimes it's hard to ignore, because you run into the black folk who are thinking that, like in my building where I live, there's a black man who just moved in, and I try to befriend him, and one day I had said something which was not derogatory, and I mentioned, like, oh yeah, this black guy I heard. I mentioned black guy. He did something. He said, why do you say
black guy? Right.
Why do you have to
just say guy?
Black?
Yeah, right.
Well, he is a black guy. And I'm a white guy. I said right away, and then he starts getting angry at me because
sounds prejudice. Yeah. Well, it's why, Norman? Because we don't say, hey, he was a white guy. We don't say that, even if, you know what I'm saying? We don't say, and this white guy.
The blacks say white guy. Yeah. He's a white guy.
I guess that might be true. Yeah.
And then what really gets me, and I wish the black folk wouldn't do this.
No, wait a minute. As soon as you say the black folk, you understand that's prejudice, because now you're throwing everybody into one.
What the black people say about themselves.
Now,
I'm trying to say.
Again, what all black people say about themselves? See what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, okay. I stand corrected.
Okay.
All right. Can I just? Okay, I'll be frank with you.
No. I don't want you to be frank. I actually want to. We've talked for a while, Norman, but I'd like to. I've got another caller, so I want to allow somebody else to get in.
Okay, I don't want to hold you up.
Okay, thanks, Norman. Though appreciate the call.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. Bye.
Thanks. Bye now. Hi, this is Chuck Wolf. You're on the air. Who am I talking to, please?
Hi, I'm Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
Turn off the radio.
Thanks.
Oh. So, yeah, I've listened to your show a few times. Can you introduce yourself again? Because I've forgotten your name.
Oh, sure. I'm Chuck Wolf.
Chuck. Yes, Chuck Wolf. So I really appreciate your show and that you go into people's feelings and help people to get in touch with their feelings. The thing I'm always struck by is that, well, since we're on the subject of racism, and I'll put that in quotes because, I'll get into that later, but I think that a lot of what psychologists do is help people get in touch with their feelings, and that's great because a lot of, especially quote-unquote white people, are not in touch with their feelings. But you said something about how we have to think about how other people feel and think about how we feel and try to come up with a way to reach our ideal feelings, how we should feel about ourselves and how other people should feel. And I think that's part of the problem, and that's part of the reason that there is psychology, and especially the psychological schools like Freudian, Jungian, and all the ones that had started in the beginning of the 20th century, because you can't make yourself feel how you should ideally feel. I think, for myself, what I've found is you have to go through and identify your feelings as you're having them and realize what is causing the feelings and then work through them. So
let me stop you for a second. Is your first name Reed, by the way?
Jeff.
Oh, so Jeff Reed. Okay, I got it. It shows up on the phone. Yeah, so Jeff. So one of the things I'd say to you about that is that, so you're saying that at first you said you couldn't change feelings, but you're saying you have to understand your feelings. You have to work through those feelings.
Well, I didn't say you can't change them. I'm saying you can't. If you have the goal of reaching your ideal feelings first, right, then oftentimes you skip the steps.
Oh, no. I agree with that. Do you understand that you've listened before? The roadmap looks at what you are feeling, what's ideal to feel, and then ask you to consider what steps would it take to get to that ideal feeling, right?
Right.
Okay.
But that's an intellectual process. And that's where a lot of people in, I'll say again, quote unquote, our culture, which I don't know exactly what that is. And I think that's part of the problem, is that we don't know what our culture is. But part of the problem is that we think we can solve emotional problems by an intellectual process. And you have to go through the emotions and be present with them, I think, in order to get to the next step.
So just to be clear, the roadmap, the idea of an emotion roadmap is a logical, thoughtful, methodical process.
Right.
But it includes feeling what you're feeling, creating strategies that take you through the experience to get to what you want to feel. And then I think all of that has emotional components in it, because it starts as an intellectual process, which makes it sort of pulls you back from the subjective feelings that are kind of, cluttering your mind and causing you confusion or doubt or uncertainty. And then by pulling you back and saying, let's take a look at what's really happening. Let's understand what's going on. And when we understand what's causing certain feelings, and we understand that our reaction and our behaviors and our beliefs, et cetera, are causing certain consistent behaviors when we experience certain things that are problematic, I definitely think that emotionally we can then combine emotion and thinking, logic, together. They're not one or the other. They're together to change feelings. That's how it works for me.
But how do you know what you should be feeling? It's like going through the alphabet from A to Z. Okay, I know I want to get to Z.
You raise a good point, Jeff. It's not easy to know.
And then if you skip B, C, D, E, F, etc.
Well, I mean, I've been doing this for my lifetime, so I'm pretty good at helping people think this through about how you get from one feeling to another. There's a lot of science to this, but there's an art too. The science is the new science of emotional intelligence is only some 20-some years old. That's teaching us about how feelings work. So we have a cognitive understanding of feelings, but that's not feeling them. That's just understanding how they work. The other thing is to know who the person is that you're talking to. Right. What I find is if I want to change somebody's behavior, just think about a behavior you want to change. And it's a behavior that's not logical. You've been doing it for a long time, and it's just something that doesn't really make any sense at all if you're really honest with yourself, and yet you continue to do it. It could be overeating, over drinking, overworking, over exercising. It could be anything. So anything like that is a problem, and yet you're unable to solve it is almost always because you're feeling something that's driving that. So what I've attempted to do is I've teased out through a set of questions, helping people think through what's going on inside them, and then coming up with strategies based on the science, based on the person. That's the art, is to understand the person. The science is the emotional intelligence science technology that's been developed over the last 20-some years. And so all that together informs people and helps you to feel like you have more control over your life than you might have ever had before. And that's a beautiful thing.
Right. Well, let me give an example of what I'm talking about in terms of the subject today, racism, systemic racism, and how we as a culture in the U.S. seem to have decided that our end goal is to end racism, and yet we have a huge cultural, political divide. And as your last caller was mentioning, Norman was talking about someone in his building, and then he wanted to speak about a generalized group of people, and you said, well, are you saying all black people are this way? And
as soon as
he
you do
couldn't
that.
really, he found himself tripping over his thought constructs. So there's an emotional component and there's a thought process, which leads us into, I think, certain blind alleys or, we paint ourselves into a corner. So this is the example that I would give. We have this idea, a lot of people think, okay, I'm Black, I'm Asian, I'm Hispanic, I'm white, something like this. When we say that, and then we say racism is based on people treating people of another quote-unquote race as inferior or otherizing them or putting them down, prejudice, and various different conditions, it's kind of predicated on the idea that I belong to this group, you belong to that group, or there's different races. So the construct, in order for somebody to be a racist, they have to have some kind of construct that there is such a thing. And I know when you were talking about you grew up and I grew up with this quote-unquote colorblind thing. To me, that's going from A to Z without taking the steps in between. You have an idealized goal, but you identify, or I identify, or somebody identifies as being a white person and says, I want to get to the place where I don't see color, so I'm going to treat everybody as though they're just like me, and I'm not going to bring up the word color. So that denies someone who has lived like Whoopi Goldberg, or, I think, a person who identifies as being Jewish. I think it's a very similar thing that you experience all different kinds of experiences of being prejudiced against, somebody being prejudicial against you. And to have somebody who hasn't had the experience go through it, not go through that experience of having been treated very unfairly, you don't know what it's like. You just know the end goal, and it's easy to skip, like maybe letter L to M or O to P, because you've never had that experience. So as an intellectual construct, you don't know how that feels. You think you know, but you don't. You can say, well, I can imagine driving in a car and being pulled over and, officer, what did I do? They won't tell you. They tell you to get out of the car or something. Well, why should I? And then, you end up being shot. So you don't know what that's like until you've lived through it.
Yeah, and I don't know that I don't know that some of us are ever going to live through some of the. You know what I'm saying? We aren't all going to live through the same experiences as people that are different. Right?
Exactly.
Right.
So that's not an intellectual process. What gets you through it is sharing the experience of another person. It gets you closer to it.
You mean by listening to the other person?
Listening, yep, and talking to them about it.
Okay. Well, I think that helps you to understand it. I don't know that you feel it. I don't think you can feel when somebody else.
Empathy. It's called empathy.
Well, no, I understand that. But I mean, if you have cancer, I don't know that you can say to somebody who doesn't have cancer that I have cancer and expect them to feel what you're feeling about that.
Right, but there's a difference. For instance, if you talk to a doctor who's treating cancer all the time,
yeah,
they might be very cool about it in terms of they don't feel it because they have to slough off those feelings every single day in order to deal with it. Whereas if you had a close friend who had cancer and they describe the feelings, you watch them go through it, then it makes it easier to empathize with them. But it's not an intellectual process. The doctor may know 1,000 million times more about cancer, and I've watched people go through the emotional stages, but they have learned to block it out because they have to in order to continue in their profession. Some doctors, some are able to.
Well, Jeff, I've been listening to you for a while. I'm trying to understand. So I understand you see empathy a little differently than I do. I see intellectual empathy and I see emotional empathy. I don't see them as the same. But
I'm saying emotional empathy is different. Very different.
I agree with you, but I don't always know that you can feel what somebody else feels around certain topics. You can understand their feelings and why they feel that way, and you can feel empathy for them, but it's not the same as feeling what they're feeling. I think that's different. So anyway, can I ask you what your bottom line is here, Jeff?
Well, on the subject of racism, I don't think this idea of saying, you can't experience what I've experienced unless you're the same skin color, I don't think that gets you anywhere.
Oh, okay.
Because it just ends up being where we were 150 years ago.
Yeah, no, I understand. Okay.
I mean, the climate in this country has gone the opposite, and there's two mistaken points of view. One is that quote unquote white people, and I'll get into that again further, but
I'm going to run out of time, Jeff. So
but to say, oh, let's be colorblind when we're not, or to say it's all about race and you have to identify with your color, and that's going to solve the problem. I mean, that's the kind of extreme of critical race theory, and neither all white people or black people or people who call themselves white or black fit into either of those categories. You know, there's people on both sides or other sides who are black or white or different races. But the solution, I think, is more based on emotional empathy, which you only get by, you know, trying to get closer to living in somebody else's shoes by experience.
Okay. I'm going to say thank you because I got to get off and wrap up. But thanks for the phone call, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so folks, this is, again, it's a challenging subject to talk about. And I think Jeff's point and Norman's point, I mean, we all have opinions. It's tough to talk about them because as soon as you say something, you might be stepping on somebody's toes. So, you know, as I said, one of the things I discovered years ago, I was at Howard University in D.C., a traditional black college, and it was one of my cousins actually was a professor there, and I was meeting some of the faculty. I just came in and I was getting to interview and talk with people, and it was really interesting because at the time, you know, we were going to the concept of, you know, should you call a person of color a black person, an African American person, or just an American? And different faculty had very different opinions at Howard about those terms at that time. Again, I hate to say that any one group feels a certain way. I can say, I think, that while I appreciate that the idea of recognizing somebody's color and paying attention to that was different. And when Jeff said I grew up with that, I didn't really grow up with that. I grew up with prejudice about anybody really different, including people of color and people that weren't the same religion and people that didn't live in my neighborhood. I mean, it wasn't like one group. It was like lots of groups. But you know, with the chance to try and be the best possible version of me, I kept trying to grow. I kept trying to understand other people and how to help other people be the best versions of themselves. And that's what I've tried to do with this show, everybody. So I hope you enjoyed the show. I know it's challenging to think about these things, but you do want to think about these things and you want to make life better for yourself and everybody else around you. So do the very best that you can. The idea of the emotion roadmap is to think about how you're feeling and how other people are feeling. Not just one group, but any group. And, you know, all the time. And that not everybody in one group is going to feel the same way as everybody else in that group. We can't make those statements. We can say groups of people feel a certain way, but other groups feel differently. So do the best you can to be the best you can be. I guess that's the message. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you in a week. I'll be back next week. This has been Chuck Wolf. You're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM, listener-supported radio. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Bye-bye.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.